The White House has condemned an arson attack on an anti-abortion group in Wisconsin. It's also demanding abortion rights protesters not resort to violence. Outrage is still rippling through the nation 1 week after a draft opinion from the Supreme Court showed a majority of justices preferred overturning Roe v. Wade. I was joined a short time ago by Mark Watson. He's director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute in Washington, and I began by asking him what he thought the broader implications would be for US politics.
I think there's two key points there, Kieran. One is the fact of the leak. It makes you realise how deep the divisions are. Once upon a time, not so long ago, it would have been unimaginable that a draft decision of the Supreme Court would be leaked the way it has. But I think it just points again to something we've discussed on a number of occasions, just how far apart the two sides of politics can be in this country today. The second thing is, of course, if the Supreme Court were to follow, and this is only a draft decision that's been leaked, but if it were to go down that path and overturn Roe v. Wade, that would push the decision-making power on abortions back to the legislatures in the 50 states here in the US. But politically, what it would mean is, I think, that it would motivate the Democratic base in the midterm elections, which are coming up later this year, in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have otherwise been motivated. I think there's some disenchantment across the Democrats of the way this administration has played out. But I think something like overturning Roe v. Wade, you would see, would give the Democratic base not just something to oppose, but something to support, which would be, returning the decision-making power that was found in the Constitution in Roe v. Wade back to return to the status quo effectively, but also to lobby state legislatures and indeed senators and others who may be elected at the midterms with that particular issue in mind.
You've been there a number of months now, having lived there for a long time previously. What's your read on just how divided that country is right now? Just picking up on what you said there about how unusual it is to see a leak out of the highest court in the land, but it seems those divisions that we see on the street are there in the Supreme Court as well.
They are. I mean, the Supreme Court right now, they've built barricades around the Supreme Court, which itself is quite extraordinary. We have protesters right outside the houses of Supreme Court justices protesting, also very unusual. It really does. There are certain touchstone issues in the United States, and abortion rights, pro-life or women's rights, freedom of choice rights. That is a real hot button issue in the United States, has been for a very, very long time. And why this is significant is at least Roe v. Wade settled the law for nearly 50 years and took some of the steam out of that issue because it had been settled. It had been whittled away a little bit by some subsequent decisions and indeed had been criticised by legal scholars, even liberal, small L liberal scholars for its legal reasoning. But what it did have was certainty, and it had laid down for 50 years certainty in the US system, the legal system and the political system around this very, very controversial issue. So overturning it would, again, really highlight the divisions in this society even further.
So, Mark, you talk about this issue giving some momentum to the Democratic cause. What about Donald Trump and his own political ambitions, given he appointed 3 conservative justices to the Supreme Court during his term in office?
Well, certainly conservative, big C conservative Republicans. Absolutely. I mean, one of the lasting legacies of the Trump administration will be the 3 Supreme Court justices that he was able to have appointed during his term in office. That's 1/3 of the court. It's a very significant weight on the scales of the Supreme Court. And he will certainly say that he delivered on that promise, and it was an election promise way back when he was standing for election, that he would deliver Supreme Court justices, conservative justices to the Supreme Court. And you see the effects. As indeed, I think, Kieran, we talked about once before how these decisions on the Supreme Court, the appointments by presidents last way beyond the actual term of the presidency, and indeed sometimes outlive the presidents themselves.
Now, we've seen the ongoing support for Ukraine out of the United States continue, including, Mark, a visit by the First Lady of the United States to Ukraine.
Yes, that was a surprise visit, and I think it's just another layer of US demonstration of support for Ukraine, and it's actually very personal. It took place on Mother's Day, and she met a counterpart First Lady, and I think there's some really very genuine emotion there between the two of them when they met. And as I say, it's just another layer on US support for Ukraine. But I think it was a very personal gesture, and I think it actually resonated here for sure.
We've had delegations from more than 30 nations in Australia right now for a maritime conference. It's called the Indo-Pacific Sea Power Conference 2022, hosted by our Navy. How significant is this as a gathering that we're seeing in Sydney right now, in broader terms, when you look at the region, what's happening in the Pacific, and also the Quad itself, when you've got so many senior figures from navies around the world here to meet and hold discussions?
Yeah, look, the fact of an event like this isn't the key point here. I mean, events like this, land power, air power, sea power conferences, are quite regular things on the world calendar, but the timing of this is definitely significant. What we've seen is a shift away from land-based conflicts that the Australian Defence Force and others have been engaged in the Middle East and in Afghanistan for the past 20 years. And we're seeing a shift now back to the Indo-Pacific, to our own neighbourhood. And, geography matters. And Australia is an island nation, and our maritime borders are critical, both in terms of the supply routes that bring us our oil, that bring us key inputs to our agriculture, like fertilisers, for example. But equally and increasingly, they also allow us to export critical minerals, strategic minerals, particularly to our allies and partners.
ASPI's Washington Director Mark Watson, thank you as always. Appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Kieran.